Yeah.
Okay, are we on? Can we be on? Good evening. Welcome to the Town of Hanover Selectboard meeting of March 28th, 2023. Here tonight to have some fun and do good work for the town. As always, our first order of business is public comment. Hearing none, the second order of business is I hereby establish I love to do this, a public hearing to discuss and hopefully approve the 2023-24 budget. So this, for the audience, this is probably our fifth meeting relative to the budget, and we've been working at this quite diligently for many months, and we've had many public hearings relative to the budget, and we're here tonight to kind of get caught up as to what's happened in the last couple of weeks and hopefully move forward. So Alex, I think it's yours. What has changed for the last 2 weeks?
Sure. So I'll say just a couple things, and then Ellen's going to walk us through a couple of the changes from, I think the last update was from last week, and walk through that, and then we can answer any questions and go through anything that folks would like to. But before we do that, especially just because this is a sort of formal public hearing, I just want to thank all of you for the support during this process and all the questions from the Finance Committee. They've been challenging, but very good, because it has helped Ellen and I really get up to speed perhaps more quickly and more thoroughly than we ever thought we could or wanted to. And so this has definitely been a bit of an adventure, but there is no way that, the budget that we have tonight for your approval to go to town meeting, it is a very lean budget, it is a tight budget, but it incorporates a lot of very important changes that we talked about. And there's no way that we could have gotten to where we are without everybody's questions and without all of the sort of digging in things and uncovering issues and then finding more issues and pulling those threads. And we've unraveled a few sweaters over the last couple of weeks.
Sure.
And so just wanted to really extend our appreciation for everybody's kind of participation and some members of the public who've written in questions. And so with that, I will pass it off to Ellen, who's going to give us a sort of summary and update and walk us through a few of the high-level numbers, and then we can kind of go wherever all you want to.
Sure. Thanks, Alex, and again, I'll reiterate my appreciation to the Select Board, to the Finance Committee, and also to all of our department heads who really got this budget process kicked off well before I arrived, and without their hard work and input, we certainly wouldn't be where we are today looking at this budget. So just very appreciative of all the support. I think that when we think about the major changes from the last time we looked at the spreadsheets, I think there are two different buckets. First, with a lot of input from the Finance Committee, we really did a deep dive on the interfund transfers, and there were some disconnects, there were some math errors, but in the end, not an impact on the tax rate that we'll talk about in a minute. So I think that was a big change. And then in the template that Alex sent out recently, I think the other big change is that now you'll see the fully formed both revenue and appropriations for all the different funds. So whereas in our previous versions, the property taxes were not populated in the general fund, the use of fund balance assumption was not populated there. And so really when you look at the budget where we stand today in the template, the funds are balanced except where we're assuming the use of fund balance, and we have one question, I believe, on the water fund. But really to focus in on the general fund, we are looking at requesting appropriations in the general fund of $19,638,000 in change. The biggest driver of those appropriations are the compensation for our town employees, and The compensation year over year from 2023 is increasing by $1.1 million. That represents 69% of the total budget. It really is the overall driver.
I'm gonna be working off of, I know we have handouts that I hope you all got too.
No, I can't see those.
Okay.
Well, those may be outdated, so everything was just sent out about a half hour ago, an hour ago.
Okay.
So
Are we gonna be able to look at some of these numbers?
that's what I just realized. I think that what you're probably looking at is not the most up to date, which is why I want to throw those up on the screen at very minimum here.
Okay, so there's the 19,638,000. We also have the breakdown by the fund, you know, where it's broken down into compensation, capital, and yes. And so, again, this, you can see the breakout between the different buckets, and you can see the compensation at the 13,646,000 again represents just under 70% of the total appropriations for the general fund. We've actually taken a further step. In this slide, you're seeing operating expenses at just under $6 million. That's a combination of operating expenses and capital expense. And so we've taken the further step to break those two, just because we have such variability in the capital from year to year. And so
you say to capital, that's money into the reserve fund. That's the taxable amount.
that's
Yes.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the 1,000,001 is coming out of, actually this year's, what we're purchasing this year with the reserve.
Correct, yeah, yes.
Okay,
And so the combination of those two numbers is, you know, roughly $2 million. Because again, the appropriations going to the capital funds are an outflow as well as the capital spending.
Well, if I see down below, to the capital, which is what we're putting into reserves, is the 2.194 billion, right? And what we're actually spending this year is 2.5, 2.48. So it's a pretty small delta this year, which is, sometimes it could be a much larger delta than that. But a lot of times when we see the budget, it includes what we're spending, not what we're putting into reserves from year to year. And that can really set off it can change it can impact the change from year to year dramatically. But so you almost have to pull out the capital to see what's really going on. Okay.
So look at the change year over year. So overall, again, our appropriations are about 69% for compensation, about 11% for capital, and about 20% for operating expenses. How are we proposing to pay for that? A combination of three different buckets. We are looking at property taxes, and I don't know if you want to put up the calculation. Based on this year's estimated net assessed value, at last year's tax rate, we generate 11,227,000. With a 6.51% rate increase, that adds another $734,000. So our total tax revenue that we're looking at is the $12,010,739. That will represent about 61% of our appropriations. So that's paying for 61%. The second piece really are the non-property tax revenues at about $7.1 million. Some of the biggest drivers of that revenue are the motor vehicle registrations, that transfer from capital, our meals and rooms tax for fiscal year '24. A couple other large items are the dispatch fees, of course, building permits. And again, overall, that represents about 36% of our total revenue. And then the balance, we're proposing to use undesignated fund balance of $516,750. That represents about 3% of the revenue.
Okay. Is there a slide that shows those numbers? If not,
The non-tax revenues, we don't, but we can add that one
okay.
if you like.
Because again, the obviously between the tax revenue and the fees and the use of undesignated fund balance, it's got to come up to the amount of our budget.
And it does. Actually, we have an excess of $875 right now,
All right.
which we can.
That's a wild night on the town.
Right, that's right.
Okay. And the tax rate, the final tax rate we've come to is what, please?
6.5.
Tax rate increase?
So the tax rate increase is 6.51%.
6.51, which is actually down from the last time we met.
It
Yeah.
is, yeah. Last time we were talking much closer to 6.8%.
Okay. Okay.
Well, I was just going to make a comment on the slides that if there are other things, so I'm just making a few notes too, because although of course this is important for tonight to approve the budget and select board, obviously town meeting is a whole other layer here, and so if there's things that we should add in or take out from the slides, just send those notes and we'll create new slides circulate.
And what I'm speaking off of is if it had been polished, I would have put it in a slide. It was certainly, notes to speak from, but we can also add that and circulate that. I think the other question though that you had Alex, was overall, what does this tax increase mean to a house that's assessed at $500,000? For the general fund, it's $135. And then, of course, we have the fire tax on top of that. In District 1, that'd be an additional $45. And so it's an increase of $180.
And the use of undesignated fund balance was how much again, and what does it bring that fund down to as a percentage?
So I can show that.
The total is $516,750.
It's a little hard to see up here. And so that includes removing the overlay and the veterans exemptions from the fund balance calculation also.
Okay. Let me just go to the bottom. Let's get to what
What
is now our forecast.
Sorry, I was hiding the one part you asked about. So that's here.
So the forecast is that we end up at the end of FY24 with 15, almost 16%.
Yeah.
So we stayed above the 15%, is that correct?
We did. And part of that was in benefit, one of the previous versions, we had double counted the usage, the overlay, and the veterans credits from last year. So that when we took those back out, it bumped our percentage numbers up a little bit.
Okay. All right, so you end up.
Yes. Finance Commissioner's video notes. So we can't go through a whole budget season without somebody handing out some paper. So Alex had said that if we were going to, change the format, we should wait till next year. So I thought he meant using the format that we're all used to, which is what the use with a little bit of the hybrid that Alex and Ellen have introduced. And I guess the thing that I wanted to
Kari, why don't you wait till you get to the mic?
Yeah.
Yes. So I guess the thing that I wanted to discuss, I guess that my one point would just be, I don't think we can get too caught up in the percentages this year of the fund balance. The first point I wanted to look at, I wanted to look at the numerator and the denominator. So the numerator is the first yellow bar here on the front page that says unaudited fund balance of June 30th, 2022, and we do see that 3206 on the MS form. However, that's not an undesignated number. We've not pulled out from that the monies that need to go to the Conservation Commission, the Capital Land Improvements Fund, et cetera, et cetera. So the number that's there, it's a real number and it's valid, but it's not the benchmark that we used in the past. So I would just say, again, the numerator isn't the same. Now if we go to the back side, we have another yellow bar. And I have to say, last year, this spreadsheet also caused a lot of indigestion. It's a very difficult one, so it's not too surprising. But there we see the fiscal year 2023 budgeted general fund expenditures. And I see that 19,035,066, and you can all find that on page 72 of the annual report, as well as a number of other places. But at least this version of this spreadsheet that was posted at about, I think, 6:55 tonight. I grabbed it quick, updated this, and I think it still had that number as being 16,693,000 or whatever. So that's the numerator. So when it comes to the percentages, the numerator's kind of, not what we've been seeing. I'm not sure that the denominator is what we've used in the past either. And it sort of goes on. So all I'm saying is that this year, I don't think we can be considering the percentage because we're just not getting that right. What we can look at, however, is what's in the pink boxes on the front. And that basically is looking at what are we doing in terms of using these one-time funds for recurring expenses. Last year at this time, we thought we were using $226,000 for recurring expenses. This year, depending on how you view the one-time staff payments, because they're not actually one-time, we did them last year, and we're probably going to be seeing significant increases that will make it seem like it's carrying forward to next year, but it's going up to $450,000 of one-time funds for recurring projects. I mean, I understand that, the policy that the select board has says that, we can go down to the 15%, up to, we can take over to 3 years, and Alex and Ellen have us doing it in one. But it's a big departure from past practice. It may be appropriate. I just wanted to make sure that's highlighted for you. And that is also when you see the $450,000, we have to also keep in mind that when it comes to the ambulance fund, that we're talking about using $75,000 of undesignated fund balance there to basically help us through, recurring costs. So this is a huge departure, and I just really wanted to make sure that you were all aware of that, because there would be some things, that you potentially, said that you want to keep the tax rate where it is and just relieve the use of the undesignated fund balance. There are some items in the budget that are new this year that are optional. We've heard from the town manager why we would like, the management would like to see those things incorporated, but I haven't heard the select board talk about where's that balance between using undesignated fund balance for recurring costs versus, some new things that we would like to do. So that is really, one of the things that I worked on over the weekend, along with the other things that Alex and Alan got to see. And again, I just really want to make that point for you to all be aware that that's one of the aspects of this particular budget. And I'll probably be back, so I'll let the conversation continue. Thank you.
Okay.
If there's any, unless you wanna.
Well, how about responding to Kari's comments about 450,000 in recurring costs?
So most of the projects that are listed as one-time from last year, I would not consider one-time projects. So if we were to kind of compare apples to apples, if you add up the additional projects from last year, 79,000 plus 10,000 plus 28,5, 30 plus 45 plus 50, the numbers are not that different. I think that, in fact, this would actually be less if you counted those projects. Now, I don't think everybody agrees about that. So I think largely, we are of the opinion that using less fund balance over time would be better. This is obviously a tough budget year. And the 170,000, for example, the staff payments, that seems like an easy one-time expense to charge to the undesignated fund balance. If the fund balance were in a more precarious state, I would certainly agree the percentages, that is hard to track down to the decimal place over time, based on the sheets that we've seen, the different numbers that have circulated. So, is it 15.6 or 15.2 or 16.1 or 14.9? It's probably all around the same. If we were looking at June 24, fund balance being 9%, we wouldn't be proposing the numbers that are in here. The guidance that we got early on from in the process from the select board was, if we're above that 15%, we're basically in sort of safe territory. So that's sort of how we built this budget.
Yeah.
We could go back and make changes if folks really, if they wanted to. We could figure out something to do. But considering the fund balance, whether it's 15 or 14 or 16, we're in pretty good shape with it. And expect there to be a little regeneration this year coming up. So we're not really worried about it. We're also talking about, although we eliminated the ambulance fund balance, we are talking about merging fire and ambulance into the general fund as well, and the fire fund balance is also pretty healthy, so that leaves us in just as good, if not better shape if we were to do that next year. This is definitely an area that we flagged for needing a little bit more discussion, evaluation, how we want to approach this in the future, and from a tracking perspective, from a policy perspective, et cetera. Obviously. Yeah, a zero usage of fund balance would probably be the most ideal goal, but we are years away from, I think, being at that point.
I think during this whole process, we recognized that it was going to be a challenge to bring this budget in at less than 7%, given our investment in salaries and wages and benefits.
Right.
So we recognized from the beginning that there was going to probably need undesignated fund balance usage. And one of the guidelines we kind of set out was, if we can end up with a projected of greater than 15%, then we are, in some sense of the word, within our guidelines. We are giving it back maybe sooner than we said we'd have to, but it's still kind of okay. And the use, and going forward, we understand using undesignated fund balance for recurring expenses does come back to bite you next year. And we'll have to deal with that next year. So, and I'm kind of pleased that it's as small a number as it's come out to be. I was anticipating the need for more. So I don't think we've deviated too much from our process, and it was anticipated, at least by me, that this would be the end result. Again, I'm just pleased it's the smaller numbers we have. And again, like I said, we can't trust the percentage. That discourages me. But I think to the extent we've made a good faith effort to do that, and we're looking at above 15%, I'm going to take that as okay. I don't know what else to take. Again, we talked about trying to make it as apples to apples as we could from previous years' calculations. So I assume you've done your best effort to do that. Bill?
Go ahead.
All right, just two questions. I know you can't magically predict what's going to happen on June 30th, 23, but my sense has been that there's going to be something left over. Or is that not true, do you think? Right now, what you know today, and I'm not holding you to a number, but each year there's been some give there. And so I don't know if that's going to be a problem this year or not.
But
We do show some regeneration, basically some unused fund balance in the budget, and that's part of the calculation. So we do have that. I mean, that is definitely, especially this being our first year, it's a little hard to pin that down more accurately. Hope that'll probably get a little more accurate over time.
Yeah.
About what, being able to know and track each of the different accounts and, what we expect is used, vacancy rates and staff positions, et cetera. So we do kind of make our best guess. And I'll also say, even though I think it sounds like there may be some different definitions of what's one time and what's recurring, at least, Kari, working off of your numbers here, the total amount used from last year to this year, again, putting aside maybe some debate about one time versus recurring, it's not a huge difference. 469, 298 for last year and 516, 705 this year. And considering the challenge that we're sort of facing this year and the $1.5 million in compensation, kind of like what Peter said, it could have been worse. Not to understate the the sort of care that should be applied to using any of this, but if we were doubling the amount that we used or something along those lines, that would be a little more concerning. Although I understand not quite all exactly 100% on the same page about one time, what falls in which of the two categories.
Yeah, so I guess my point is that as best we can tell, sitting here at the end of March, putting aside any major crisis, we're not going to have an overabundance of problems between now and June 30, as best we can tell. So that's just a natural flow. That's all I'm trying to state. Can't predict the future, but let's just go with it. And then the other issue we have, which is different than most years, is we're going to be sitting on ARPA money of
1.2.
no, not because you've already allocated some.
About 965, I think, beyond what's in this budget.
Right.
Not what's in this budget, which is another update we made for today.
That's what I
Right.
would imagine.
Yeah, so that's something we did, and just if I can sign up for one moment, which is that we did remove, we had sort of not the best or clearest way to show. Basically, we removed the expenses from the budget that are being paid for by ARPA, because ARPA sits totally outside the budget process. It's not a revenue like another type of grant, for example, that would count in the budget, where you put your expense in the budget and then you say, okay, we're going to pay for it with taxes. And then we got the grant money, so now we can offset that. ARPA doesn't really work that way. It's fully outside. So we did update the spreadsheet and the slides and everything to show that everything that was meant to be offset by ARPA has been removed, and I believe it's 965, something around there, that's remaining in the original 1.2 million.
So come July 1, we're still sitting on 9 point something
Right.
$100,000.
$900,000.
$900,000.
9 point something would be great.
I know
Sure.
we're going to have many discussions on how to allocate and deal with issues that are long-term, etc. But compared to some other towns who are sitting on 0 or are looking at a minus, I think we're sitting pretty well. So I'm trying to sense without getting into nitpicking 1% one way or the other here or there. So am I just making valid assumptions here?
I think we do.
Great. Yes.
Okay, that's all.
Clark?
Well, we have a few here, so you can change it up, Kari.
We just like each other, so we're sitting together. So Kari Yasmus again. I failed to introduce myself the last time. I'm the chair of the Hanover Finance Committee, and we are meeting tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. So we tonight also want to make sure that we get all of our questions answered, because we feel that we need to do due diligence tomorrow night. So I guess to put a little finer point on some of the things that might come up in terms of, the trade-offs that you're looking at. Obviously, the costs that are associated with the collective bargaining agreements that you've approved cannot be changed. But there are items in the budget, such as the $20,000 for downtown activities, $15,000 for PR or public information, $30,000 for unspecified new programs, $25,000 for a new contingency fund. I guess those would be the main things. I think, also in the past, when we've added a new position, such as the town clerk, there was a lot more, does it need to be a full-time FTE? Is there a way of, moving this person's responsibilities around and that person's responsibilities around? And I'm thinking again, what might be my personal values would be, and not liking to kick problems down the road. For me personally, I, would prefer to see things stay at the 6.5%, but reduce the reliance by maybe reducing some of these items that we could introduce in future years without a great deal of harm to the town. But I have to say, the other thing that I am concerned about, and maybe you've heard feedback from people as well. I don't know if any other finance committee members would like to, offer feedback. But I think the 6.5% increase in the tax rate, no matter how you explain it, for a lot of people, that's just going to sound high. And again, I guess those things that I just listed off, with some trimmings here and there, you get to 4 cents, 4.5 cents pretty easily. That's a % off, if that is the way you want it to go, or you would be decreasing, again, that reliance, from $450,000 to $350,000. And I just want to say that what I am calling recurring and not non-recurring, that's not my definition. That's what we said, that's what this body called it last year. So I'm just repeating, that's not me. Like these things in the gray, the top one was considered covering recurring costs, and all those other things this group considered to be one-time costs. I wasn't the one who assigned.
So you have the one-time staff payments as a recurring cost?
Yeah, that one I did in there, and I did explain, that you could consider that one time, except for we did it last year, and that in the coming year, we're likely to need to have increases that will absorb that amount in order to get to where we need to be. So I agreed that one could be, could go either way. But since we keep calling it one time, and it's really at this point not one time, that's really a misnomer. I thought I would.
Let me try to address your broader question.
Pardon me?
Let me try to address your broader
Thank
question. Our job is to try to balance the needs of the town with the willingness to pay, ability and willingness to pay. And that's why we kind of put the ceiling at 7%. And I think that number, 7%, is quite typical of the school board, many other communities around us. They're at 7% or higher. So we're not out of line relative to other communities addressing the exigencies of, and our particular exigencies relative to our need to catch up with salaries and wages. And I think our ability to control the operating expenses and non-salaries and wages has been quite significant. If you go down the list of all the departments and what they have gone up in terms of operating expenses, I don't think there's one of them above 100,000. It's quite given a 8% inflation rate in a lot of our costs. I think we've already shown a lot of diligence in terms of keeping that operating expense line to a very tight budget in order to accommodate the very high S&W that we needed to do. So I don't, and I've talked to many people. I've talked about the tax rate and gotten a reaction, and I know we probably all have done that. But I've gotten general, oh, it's too bad, but we understand, kind of a reaction, not, oh, hell, I won't go kind of, you know. So people understand what's going on in the general economy. People understand what's going on in all the communities around us. The people see what the school board's been able to accomplish. And they didn't even have to deal with a wage negotiation this year. And they had their own exigencies based upon the 5th grade and all that stuff that flies around for them. But anyway, and overall, my sense is that the community, this is twice as high as what we've typically brought into town meeting, and we know that. But we knew that going into it. And I'm just pleased that we were able to get where we got to at 6.5% rather than 7%. And the specific expenses the specific expenses that you've discussed, I think each have some logic behind them, setting the stage for future years. Some of them are placeholders in terms of actual dollars, because we know they're going to have to grow over time. But there's a way to start having a conversation about a different way to have tighter budgets, and therefore we need a contingency fund. The money we're spending on the election system is, we learned this year how much of a burden that is, and how much we've been how much we've benefited from people's generosity in doing all those jobs, and we have to fess up that we have to invest the money to do it properly. So I think each one of those is defendable. Could they be cut? Sure. And then you're right, they add up to about 1% if I tickety-ticked up my life. So you have to say, is it worth the 1% in the tax rate in order to not have achieved those specific objectives? And the board will, that's what we're deciding, I guess, this evening, as to whether we want to go forward with that. But I appreciate the specific ones I've looked at those as well, recognize those as optional, I guess you could say, not mandatory. But I think each one of them has a justification. So that's kind of where my head is on each of those, actually. I don't know, other board members want to just chime in?
What was the budget increase for the school board?
Kim could probably speak to that
Just what the
better than I,
percentage-
but
yeah, what was the percentage?
The budget is a very different number than the tax rate increase because of the loss of state revenues.
But what's the tax rate
So what was
increase?
the tax rate increase?
That's,
Kim?
yeah.
Hi, Kim Hartman. Was hoping not to have to say anything tonight. School board representative on the Hanover Finance Committee, also the Budget Committee chair for all of the school districts. So our final Hanover projected tax rate, keep in mind that that's actually with a 14.5 or whatever it was, million NAV, which I understand you are using a 12.5. I just want to make sure that that's clear. We were at about a 6.89%, but keep in mind that a substantial half of that essentially was related to the state, and then the Dresden just swing in student population, which are not controllable, and they don't actually rely on what our actual expenditures were. If you were to look at the school in Hanover, if you look at the Ray School, we're talking like a 3.2% or somewhere in that range, don't quote me, 3.2% increase in total expenditures. And we're talking over at Dresden, combined, it's like 4.5%. But when you talk about this loss of state revenue, yada, yada, that's when you get to the higher 6.8%.
Which is the reality of what you have to do for business.
Which,
I mean, that's what had to be approved to run the show. It's 6.89%.
right, I mean,
With all the ups and downs, which I understand the complexities go on forever, and the state is not helping, what's for sure, with the schools.
It's almost,
But the Hanover School District took the hit like every other school district.
so I would say, I mean, we did cut FT, so
Yeah,
I mean,
no.
we did make reductions, and so if I were to ask a question, I think what would be helpful to share, and this is, I'm offering this as a helpful question, is to understand, what reductions in this budget were considered and were made. Because we had, a difficult decision at the Ray School to cut an FTE that was previously in our budget. And so I just want us to,
I think the answer to that question is when we asked the department heads to come in flat line with last year's operating expenses, with inflation out there as what it is, all their costs going up. And we said, please bring back a budget that we can support the salaries and wages, and you need to be really tight on your operating expenses. They did that. So it's a zillion things that the department heads came up with in order to have a relatively flat O&E budget, therefore allowing us to have a chance of affording the increase in salaries and wages. So it's not one line item. It's the department heads doing their jobs as they do well, and I think that's the answer to your question.
yeah, I could make a similar statement for the school. I could
I'm
list
sure you
those.
can.
I think it would be helpful to list at least some of them just for communication purposes. That's my recommendation.
So, but bottom line then, so we have the bottom line impact on the tax rate dollar-wise from the town's proposal. What was the end result for the school of the 6.89? Because that represents 60% of the taxes. Town is 30, county's 10%. So I'm just trying to get a sense of this will be the conversation on the street that I know I'm going to get into from people. So what was the bottom line of dollars for the $500,000 house?
It's $365 a year. Was
I'm
a
sorry,
500. So with all, which is what passed, right? All
Yeah.
warrants passed. It was $365 per year.
Okay.
So I guess people then are looking at a $500 increase overall.
Yeah.
For the year, for
And-
both entities
And the
combined.
majority's already been approved. That's
Yeah, by those who show up, which is a very different demographic
right.
than what shows up at town hall.
Yeah, okay.
At town meeting. I guess I do have one follow-up, in terms of, we also, as Ellen mentioned, look very closely at all the inter-fund charges that go back and forth. And one of the things, and thank you for catching some that I didn't catch, was that in the past, a section of the town hall staff that is responsible for the quarterly billing of sewer and water has a portion of their salaries delegated to wastewater and water. And in the spreadsheet that was posted minutes before 7 o'clock, I tried to find that line that said front office staff, and it still looked empty. And so I was wondering whether or not that, I think in the current budget, about $40,000 is, $20,000 is delegated to each of those funds to take care of the billing. Has that been added back in? Because it wasn't, I didn't see it in, where's the front office? Isn't that the town manager's,
So what has happened in the past and prior to the 2022 budget, those general admin overhead allocations actually were detailed out at the department level. So you could see the front office allocation, you could see the finance, the assessing, all those different pieces. In the 2023 budget, they were rolled into one line item. And I sort of drafted off of that approach. So right now in the budget, we have an allocation of that general fund overhead of just under $603,000 that goes out to the other funds. And included in that buildup are dollars from the town clerk and the tax collector salaries. So,
okay, but could you just say the amount again? So, because that was something that didn't appear in the total, because we were able to, see everything from DPW and police and everything. but we didn't see that in the charges to water and wastewater.
So they are, at the charge to water and wastewater each are, I believe, $145,000. And in that total is a portion is from, it includes allocations from the town clerk and the tax collector. I believe it's online.
Yeah, that would be great to see.
In the spreadsheet,
The budget, yeah. the
that is
spreadsheet.
gonna be tough to see up there.
But I think in
See on my
Here we go, that works, right? No?
Just get up close and read the numbers for the record so the public can hear whatever number you're looking at. You can't see it, that's for sure.
I'll zoom over to the row, which one?
Well, I need to find which row. It is. So it is.
I don't think it was, if anything,
It's on row 1053 for water.
right, I was looking for the, right, correct. And that, yes, is the amount that appears to be for, sort of the town manager in particular. And then I think if you go to town manager, it has town, G&A, and then under that it has front office staff. And that seems to be, and that used to be in municipal wide or unallocated. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is just that if there were another $40,000 of offset to the general fund, that would help you with your tax rate a little bit. There is also a question that I think I saw was corrected, that the fire fund was paying, it showed that it needed to pay out $34,000 more than anybody was asking for. So and I believe that the $34,000 was removed from fire, which will help that tax rate by a cent. So that is why I'm a little wondering, also then why we didn't see things go down another cent based on that change. Except for that, maybe you haven't had a chance to completely redo, because again, I saw that just before 7 o'clock. And I don't know that you've had a chance to redo the tax rate since.
Can I go back to the big picture? Because this, in my mind, this all goes back to the very beginning. We set a target for the tax rate. We know this is an art, not a science. We set that target based upon what we believed the community would accept and what our needs were. We could have set that target at 6%, at 5%, at 4%. And this budget would have come back at 5% or 4%. And now at the 24th hour to say that guideline was wrong, you can really bring it down another point. I don't think that's changing the rules of the game in the 24th hour. We got it under 7%, significantly under 7%. And yes, there was a whole bunch of trade-offs up and down.
You did that a lot with my help. This
You did.
weekend, I found over $200,000
I'm not arguing that.
of revenues for you.
Yes, and it's greatly appreciated. But at this point in time, to say there's another 120 you could cut out of this budget to get the tax rate down from 6.5 to 5.5, when we originally set a target that we've met, and everyone helped contribute, especially you, Kari, especially you.
You said 6 to 7. It would be nicer if it were close, closer to 6, especially if there are errors. And may I say that the last time I was here, I suggested that could we please get the information on Thursday so that we can communicate on Friday and get some information back in terms of being prepared for the weekend so you can work productively on the weekend. That didn't happen.
And I guess we apologize for that. And again, your help has been tremendously important. And it's involved a process with a new manager, a new finance person, digging down deeper and deeper, and your effort to help us do that was tremendous and appreciated. But we are where we are tonight.
And if there are errors in the budget that are resulting in a higher tax rate than there needs to be, that's not fair to the taxpayers.
So Kari, okay, I'm not gonna argue it, but you could also say, let's just reduce the amount of undesignated fund balance needed. Leave the tax rate where it is, and
Yes.
that's some of the changes that we've had over the last week, that was a conscious decision. Leave the tax rate where it can be and reduce undesignated fund balance. If what happens comes true, then in FY24, we're gonna show a surplus of that amount of money, and it'll go back to undesignated fund balance. Right? So, yeah, if you're correct in the assumption, and I hope you are, because that'll create a surplus in FY24, and that surplus will go back into undesignated fund balance. So
I'm not sure that's true when it concerns the water and wastewater, because it would stay with that fund and not with the general fund. So I don't believe that's a true statement.
I was talking about the general fund.
Right, but
I'm talking about the general fund. Wastewater's a world of its own,
right.
and again, it's a
But
fee-based.
if this question involves water and wastewater, then if there is an error in this year where they're not paying for services from the general fund that they are receiving, then that doesn't flow back to the general fund next year.
Okay.
So that's why I'm asking, and I have been not waiting until the 11th hour. And I think that's not a fair characterization.
Okay, all I'm saying is we set our target, we've come in the middle of our target, and yes, there's all sorts of decisions that were made by the department heads to keep their O&E down. There is some money here, the 100,000 or 120 you just described, which could be considered discretionary. Each had a purpose. And again, if we had set the target at a lower rate, the one thing I really appreciate about our department heads and this management group is they come into the target we set at the beginning. And then they have. Therefore, I'm less inclined to debate the $20,000 they want to put into the beginning of a discretionary fund as an example of what we need to do in the future.
And I've moved off of that.
They fit it into the guidelines that we created for them.
And I've moved off of that.
Pardon?
I said I have moved off of that topic.
You have?
Moved off, I've moved away, I've moved on to something else.
And so now the issue is that there's perhaps some misaccounting concerning the wastewater. And I mean, I think that, Ellen and Alex, we need to address that.
And let's assume that is correct. What would the impact be?
It would be an additional $40,000 approximately of offset to the general fund, which would be about $0.015.
Or use of less designated fund balance.
Or, that's correct, which, as I mentioned, that is something that is important to me.
Yeah. That would be my preference.
That's fair too.
And what I love to do, Kari, is just take a look there's so much detail here. Again, when I look at the general fund overhead allocation, when I go back to the years where there actually is an amount in the allocation out from the front office, I'm looking at a year where there's roughly $40,000. When I combine that $40,000 with the allocation out of the other departments that are detailed, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $590,000. And again, what I may need to do is take the $603,000 of allocation that we do have in the budget, break it down to the department level and make sure that it's landing in the correct funds. In other words, if a larger portion needs to go out to wastewater or to the water fund, that we correct that. So I can go back and take a look at that.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that if it's not included in their budget, then they won't have the money to send to the general fund. And again, I appreciate that this is incredibly detailed, and we are very fortunate that in previous years, the budget book detailed in the narrative exactly how much was coming from where and going to where, because without that, it would be lost in the mists of time, without a doubt. But that is where, I'm getting my information from is the documents that previous administration left behind. And again, it's just a matter that if that amount is included in wastewater and water tonight, I don't know that they'll have the money to pay the general fund. And if it's due to the general fund, it's due to the general fund.
And just to give you just sort of background on how I built up, I did take a look at the allocations that came out of each of those departments last year, including tax and town clerk. I took a look at that as a percent of that department budget and applied that to this year's. Then I took a look at how those allocations were distributed across the funds outside of the general fund and spread the dollars in that way. Some of them are off by $1,000 or $2,000, and that's why I went through the process of validating the fact that some of them are the same as last year's. But that was the process that I used. But again, if I can either, I'll provide you the buildup, and then if there's still concern that there's not enough dollars in wastewater and water, then we certainly can relieve the general fund and shift more dollars there.
Okay. I guess this is, to be continued. I mean, I understand this is the first budget out of the gate, and I just think that it's important that we, maintain a lot of the past practices out of fairness. If there are places that it's not fair, change it.
So how can we accommodate that potential in our vote tonight? I mean, could we vote to accept the tax rate and decide that if this is correct, we'll relieve undesignated fund balance accordingly? Would that be an adequate way to address this so we can approve a budget tonight? Because I don't think we're out of time in terms of moving on with this, but you need a couple more days, whatever it is, to figure this one out.
I don't think anybody wants to convene another budget hearing, including.
I'm looking for a practical way to deal with this tonight, which is, could we accept the tax rate increase and then acknowledge that this adjustment might be needed, in which case it would be to reduce undesignated fund balance?
I personally am comfortable with that approach.
So
That would be fine.
when it comes time to make that motion, that's what the motion is going to look like.
As long as we have the clear instruction, I think we're good, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, it does, thank you.
Which then ultimately will result in the warrant article amount that will be voted on a couple weeks from now.
Exactly right.
And that'll be what the public will be voting on at town meeting.
That's right.
And we'll be satisfied that it is as accurate and as correct as humanly possible.
Yep.
Okay.
And the approximate amount of that was about 40K, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, anything else new, exciting?
Anything else? We talked about ARPA. We can talk about Versett if you all want to, and then we also did just have an answer to your question about interest rates in the in our ICS accounts. Ellen, if you want to.
Okay, why don't we go backwards, interest rates?
Sure. I did reach out to our bankers, and for the month of February, our ICS interest rate was 4.57%.
Oh.
The New Hampshire PDIPs were at 4.6. I believe the latest information that I have from our bankers that the ICS is also now at 4.6. To give an idea of how much of an increase that is, I happen to have our August ICS statements from August of 22. At that point, the interest rate was 2.2%.
Okay.
So
One of the questions was, were we paying a penalty by dividing our balances into $250,000 tranches? And
the answer is no.
no, that's what we were hoping, that's what you thought then. Thank you for confirming it. Last time we met, board, we discussed the limiting the percent fund spending for FY24 to the $100,000 we've already committed for the Campion rink expansion or upgrade. And at that time, we were not aware of, we did not bring up two other requests that have been made for FY24. And let me try to briefly, I was hoping to get the paperwork out, but it looks like that might not have happened. So one of them was from the, I guess it would be the Friends of Oak Hill, is that the right nomenclature for the upgrade of our wonderful winter skiing opportunities? And they were requesting another $100,000. We've already committed $200,000 to them. They were asking for another $100,000 to basically cover their expected first-year operating costs deficit. And so that was the essence of the request, was to fund the first-year operating losses, I guess I should say. I'll put that on the table. My sense is that that would not be an appropriate use of reset fund. And given our other decision not to increase it beyond the $100,000 we already have, I think we just need to go back and politely say it does not meet the reset fund criteria. This is a new subject. Any gut reaction to that or reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've had thorough discussion on the Campion rink improvements. We had a thorough discussion on helping give seed money to the Friends of Oak Hill at $200,000. I think them asking us to cover the first year losses, that's, in my mind, that doesn't kind of fit the use of the Brissette funds. So even though I'm a huge fan of this effort, I too agree that this is not how they should be spent.
I think a strict reading or a reading of the Brissette fund would not qualify.
Right.
If the Brissette fund started funding every nonprofit's operating losses, we would be
there wouldn't be a Brissette fund.
We wouldn't be a Brissette fund. Okay, so I think we're consensus on that
Yes.
one?
Yes.
Okay. The second one was a request from the Hanover Conservancy. They are in they're in the quiet phase of an endowment, a fundraising effort for their endowment. They also came to the Brissette Fund for $100,000 to contribute towards that campaign. Again, I think the Brissette Fund is not aimed at increasing nonprofits' endowments. It's there to fund specific projects when they come down the line that are of high value to Hanover. So I think the same kind of logic applies. It really doesn't fit, and we've already made the decision not to increase beyond the $100,000. So I think that's a polite no as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note that this board historically and the town in general supports conservation efforts and has shown that in the allocation of set funds, what, 4 years ago? When we contributed a couple $100,000 of percent funds for the Minkbrook Forest. And so I think, and they're in, that's
And this one-
evidence to a specific project for specific recreation and conservation.
But I think, again, percent fund is not aimed at funding endowments.
Right.
Consensus?
Yes.
So I wanted to track, we did 3 and 2, what was 1? You remember? Other things we needed to
ARPA.
discuss.
ARPA.
ARPA. What about ARPA?
I think we did, which was just mentioning that we had removed things so that they're accounted for properly in the budget.
Right.
With the offset from ARPA, we have removed the parking fund usage at this point in time, pending a later conversation. I don't think there was anything else from our end for tonight, was there?
I don't
I
think
think there
so.
was.
A reminder, the 900,000 needs to be spent by,
So, legally, it needs to be committed, which basically means there needs to be a contract signed for the services by December of '24. However, the advice that we have gotten is that to ensure that we do not lose any of it,
right,
we should have it committed by December of '23, so by the end of this year. And so the idea is that we would have conversations that are starting to come together a little bit. It's starting to plan the next budget before we can finish this one, but soliciting feedback, goals from the community, having conversations here in the select board about what to use that money for in the late summer or fall of this year, and then the commitment is signing the contracts with the companies, which means the work could be happening 6 months or 9 months later. We would just have to get it all, straightened out, and then that would make the money uncommitted. Or sorry, that would make the money committed.
Okay, fine.
So this was another area of the budget that had some review this weekend, and I, again, because the updated spreadsheet came out fairly recently, I just wanted to confirm, so because over the weekend, the EV chargers were still in the budget, have those come out?
Yeah, so let's see, we made a handful of changes from what we posted on Thursday. Let me scroll down here.
Because, yeah, and again, the point here is that our capital reserve funds, to the extent that we can preserve our purchasing power by taking qualifying items and having them paid for ARPA is a good thing, because we need to spend ARPA. We would like to hold on to our reserves. But as of this weekend, there were things in the budget that could be paid for ARPA. So I just wanted to review that.
I'll run through that list, and I'm gonna pull up my other notes here. So basically, all right, so the phone system upgrade, that was $50,000 in capital. In police, that was removed from the budget. That's being paid for by ARPA. EV chargers, $50,000 out of parking, that has been removed to be paid for by ARPA. The town digitization, that is $50,000 total, $17,000 of which was in the general fund. So that has been removed from the general fund budget for a total of $50,000. The downtown placemaking, that account was increased to $25,000 from $20,000, and $20,000 of that is being was removed to be paid for by with ARPA.
So that
So
would be
it's
that
gone to
line
25?
item. in-
So it's gone to now it's 5,000. So it was 20. Sorry, it was 20, then it was 25, and then 20 came out.
But you're still getting 20 in the budget from ARPA money.
That's right. There's 20 from
So
ARPA
there's
and then
20
5,000 in the general fund.
But it's not in the budget
Right,
anymore.
so I didn't say, that was operating. Same with the town digitization, that's also an operating expense. Election supplies also an operating expense, so that 15,000 was removed from the budget to be paid for with ARPA. $25,000 for the RW black carpet, although I think it's 24,800. That was in capital and DPW, that was removed from the budget to be paid for by ARPA. And technology upgrades is in the general fund. That 55,000 was removed to be paid for by ARPA.
Right, and another advantage of this, so that carpeting, that 24/8, that was the price from 2017. It's been six years since that amount was increased, and so I don't think you're gonna get
Have
the
prices gone up in
carpeting.
6 years?
Yeah, and just while I'm on that, we have many, and again, just when you think about how I'm concerned about, we have some things that I think are maybe optional, and we have many things in the CIP that are not optional. And we think that one of our cost drivers this year is that we are putting $60,000 more into contributions than we did last year, and that's a good thing. But when you go through the different funds, there are many that are on the verge of bottoming out in the next year or two. And when you go through, and some of the big equipment items have been updated in the past 2 years, but we know things have changed in the past year. But you'd be amazed at how many of these prices were set in 17, 6 years. And so one could really ask, are we paying enough in? And so I really, between seeing the increase in the undesignated fund balance and seeing that we are falling behind in contributions to capital reserves, that is part of, really a large part of where my concern is coming from in terms of spending that isn't absolutely called for in this year, because we have some real problems in capital reserve.
And for whatever it's worth, I would agree on a broad scale in the medium and long term. We tried to highlight that a little bit in some of these, oops, not that one. In some of these slides when I took it out of the summary. But as some of the cost drivers for the next 5 years, which is 2% inflation, which is sort of at this point, that's $3 million over 5 years.
Right.
And so thinking about ways to bring more revenue into the budget, because we can't cut $3 million out of the budget, out of operating expenses. There's barely even $3 million in operating expenses. And so thinking about ways that we can identify new sources of revenue is going to be something really important over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
And in part because of that, and some of the other pieces.
Right. And part of the way that we are making our fund balances as healthy as we are by taking things out. In this year, we were going to be spending $75,000 on new appliances for the community center because they're all 20 years old. And then it went down to $25,000, and now it's gone completely. I don't know whether ARPA would be a possibility for appliances, but that's something that was identified not too long ago. There was also in the, Kim maybe wanted to speak to, that Peter Kowalski mentioned on one of his slides that places of the Main Street sidewalks are going to be requiring an asphalt overlay if we don't do something about that. And he said, well, yeah, maybe, $50,000 starters, from ARPA. So I just really feel that, that we need to be looking at our capital and projects and really leveraging whatever we can and using it wisely. Because, things are not looking rosy.
Well, isn't that part of the discussion this summer and spring
Yeah.
on the ARPA money on what needs to be done, and everything you just listed, I would assume is on the list.
It will.
To potentially, it's not going to be enough, but there's going to be priority decision making and
Yeah,
outside a town meeting vote in May. So
yeah, it's true. We talked about that. Asking the public what they thought would be good. I'm not sure that the public knows. What's happening, inside the community center.
And I think you raised a really good point. The town has not, Peter's done yeoman's work in terms of the CIP, but in terms of our facilities, there's the only facility assessment that's been done is in the Howe Library, and that was done by the corporation. It wasn't done by the town. So we don't know the condition of our buildings, and that's a huge gap. And as you said, we're talking money in the rec center for refrigerator and stove and oven, but there's a lot of other things that are in tough shape when it comes to HVAC systems and roofs and windows.
We do have a tiny bit of money in the budget to do, I don't know if it's gonna be
Facilities
enough, to do
assessment.
a facilities assessment for all the buildings. That's in one of the, I think it's in the town manager new projects line. That's the new project for this year, was the facility analysis.
Well, I think
Which is
that's
great.
important to know.
That's great.
Yeah,
I
it's-
mean, that's a
yeah.
really good, I mean,
Because
that's
an
an important.
unspecified new project is much different than knowing, oh, it is something that we need.
Yeah, I would say the facility analysis is probably top of the list, or near the top of the list.
So Alex, should this be actual ARPA funds used? Because you just went down and said, well, we're doing that, but we're doing an ARPA and we're taking it out of the budget. And as you went down there, I was spending the ARPA, the
Right.
900,000 ARPA funds as you were going through it.
That is true. We have not updated that language. I mean, at this point, now that we've taken the offsets out of the budget,
Right.
we're
But
really,
we want to
we're paying
spend
more with ARPA,
So,
so it's really just
but-
ARPA usage.
Not
It's
the
two
cost, right.
65 plus 935 is our total ARPA, so 935 will be left over for us to
Right.
play with
Right.
But
this summer.
you're.
To utilize wisely.
To utilize wisely, well, I mean,
It
we could
seems like a big
spend it
amount.
on Main Street
It does,
sidewalks in a
but-
second,
It goes
Yeah.
fast if you're paving
Asphalt.
or concrete work.
but we don't want asphalt on our sidewalks.
Right.
We want beautiful things, we don't want asphalt.
Kim?
Hi, Kim Parkman, school board representative on the Hanover Finance Committee. This might be a silly suggestion because I'm the school board person intervening in this town proceedings, but I just was thinking if we were trying to think of another possible source of funding that could potentially solve, that would not be ARPA, that would be potentially eligible for more of our capital reserve fund, and I know the schools do reserve funds differently, we don't have this, anyways, but what we have done on the school board is that, we've had when we've projected out to June 30th, which of course is, we have to do it much earlier than now, but we tended to do a conservative estimate, and so then we put a warrant article that says any surplus that is beyond what we have anticipated, and as long, as we basically are able to fund what we promised to fund, but that surplus, can this go into a reserve fund? So that's actually how we topped up our special education reserve fund this year, we're hoping to this year, right? And so it's not something that we can count on as far as being, available, but then it's also not definitely increasing tax rate. So it's kind of like, and I hear, this is a new year, to project out June 30th, I'm sympathetic to that. So if it's not done in an aggressive manner, there might be some funds available that could move into a reserve fund, which I don't know if for the town-wise, you would need to have a warrant article to do that, but I'm just trying to think of other ways other than ARPA to help the reserve funds.
Yeah. I think it's also just my sense of, first, the interesting, the history of the reserve funds, right? X years ago, we didn't even know what our assets were that had to get replaced. So we created a pretty firm list of those, and then of course every year it grew because we had forgotten about this and forgotten about that. We finally got a list that wasn't increasing a lot every year. We said, oh, that's great, this is what we need to fund. And then we said, oh my God, we had to take into account, so we were way below water at the beginning. Then we got ourselves up to here, we got noses above water. Then we said, oh my God, we have to deal with inflation. So we went underwater again and we slowly dug our way out of it. And I think we're gonna, when we do the next round of calculations with a higher inflation rate, we're gonna find the same dilemma and we're gonna have to deal with it in a variety of ways. I think one of the ways that we've learned is that setting reserves, trying to create reserves for the big ticket items, like the fire truck, like the $1 million plus things, this system doesn't work for that. And when we change our philosophy, change our approach to that, that's going to free up some of that money that has been reserved. It's going to keep the bucket a little bit fuller than we thought it was. I think, and so I agree. It is a problem we have to look at. We've got to get some new numbers, and we'll dig our way out of that hole, like we've dug our way out of the first holes we were in. But I still think the glass is half full. We have nice reserves, and more probably than any community I know of around here. Things like the sidewalk, there's a major study going on. I can almost guarantee you that's gonna have to be bonded, because the number's gonna be too big. So just my guess, but when the town decides what they wanna do with Main Street, and it'll be aggressive, my guess is the number will have to require a bond issue. That's my guess. I feel the same way about when we have a facilities needs. Those numbers, again, are gonna be so huge that they're gonna be, when we need them, they're gonna be bonded for. And in terms of a generational equity, I think it's appropriate for those things to be bonded because they're, long-term assets being paid for while they're being used. So I agree, we've got these clouds hanging out there. I think we'll deal with each cloud as it comes along. It doesn't mean we keep our heads in the sand, but I think we'll have ways to deal with each of these issues as they come to reality. Anyway, that's my optimistic self speaking. Okay, so are we, any more input from the Finance Committee? Any more input from the public? No. So I make the motion that we adopt the budget as presented with the targeted tax rate of the 6.5% and the adjustment to undesignated fund balance if the 40K turns out to be needed or true, whatever that right word is. Is that clear as mud?
I would just, again, if you want to be right on, it's 6.51%.
There you go.
Is what we would be
Proposing.
proposing with the potential adjustment based on research that we discussed.
Right, but that change would impact use of undesignated fund balance,
Right.
not the tax rate.
Right.
Okay. Is that clear? And
We're good, right?
Yes,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay.
And
So
we'll talk more.
You moved it,
I moved it.
I'll second it.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we have set a tax rate and we've got a proposed budget, plus or minus 40K. And again, thank you. Sorry, I know
Yeah,
you put
thank
in.
you for
and-
your.
And I think we need, when this is all said and done, we need to debrief a little on the process. I mean, the use of slides this year is rather than a book, has its pluses, has its minuses. I think we need to debrief on what the presentations need to be, and of course, next year we'll be in a much better position to have it done, in a more timely, have the ability to have it in a more timely way. And I think we'll have a good starting point next year,
Yes.
which we didn't have this year, which will be a tremendous help as well. So I think it'd be worthwhile to do a little brainstorming, not tonight, and maybe not even before town meeting, but after this, just to think about how the use of slides versus the book worked, what was the pluses, what were the minuses, and how to just make
Or if there's another
incremental improvements. Pardon?
I said, or if there's another way.
Or is another
By
way?
doing the book, now we've tried this, maybe there's some variation thereof.
It's gonna be all virtual reality next year.
We're gonna
We're gonna walk through a
We're gonna have
spreadsheet.
VR
Yeah,
goggles
got
and
it.
got it.
it'll be three-dimensional.
And little box.
And you can
will
step
be-
off the cliff.
Right.
Okay, so that's it. So we have one other business, which is to talk about voting machines.
Yes, thank you. So I had a request from our town clerk and town moderator. We have an opportunity to participate in a beta testing program for new voting tabulator machines. The secretary, they've been in contact with the Secretary of State. It sounds like Hanover could be one of the towns in New Hampshire that participates. Both our clerk and moderator would very much like to do so. They've talked to a few of the clerks in some of the other towns that are participating as well. I've got the thumbs up that it's like sort of interesting and worth trying. And because the select board is ultimately the body responsible for overseeing the tabulation of the votes, the request is coming before the select board to okay the use to beta test for town meeting, for the town election on May 9th, the new machines. And the idea is that then we can work out some of the issues on a not super heavy voting day, obviously before next year. I don't know what the plan is from here going forward. I don't think I have that here. There should not be any cost to us. We expect there to be technical support from the vendor and from the state during this for May 9th. Both our clerk and moderator believe that May 9th is probably the right time to try this. And that's what I've got.
Alex, do you know if these machines have a paper trail?
That is my understanding from past conversations, is that we are only looking at machines that scan digitally. But basically the change is going to be that right now, I believe when they're scanned, there is not a digital file created of the scan. And what these would do would be creating a digital photo of the scan and then also separating the paper out so you'd have both as a, so we're not be losing paper as the audit trail. That's my understanding from the last conversation. I don't have that in my notes for tonight. Yeah, everybody, I mean, I know at least in the conversations that we've had, which have been somewhat lengthy. Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
coming
you
in.
again.
Thanks, Barry.
Um,
Thank you both for all
Thank
your
you.
work.
Thank you for yours.
Bye.
Everybody has been very, very clear that the paper trail piece is like one of the most important components of the way our voting machines work. So I would be surprised if these
And
didn't have
anything
that.
we can do to get,
I move
bring
that we
newer,
approve
bring
this
newer
decision.
voting machines into New Hampshire, we should do, so.
If we
I
can
think
help
you're just
make that
looking for our
happen,
support.
get
Okay.
a motion
Yeah,
to
you have our
make it so.
support, you have our support.
Yeah, just one clarification.
Yes.
Again, I've stood near the old machine when it doesn't work. And the expert is one of us with the key, and then we get in and fumble around it and we fix it.
Very
With a new machine, which we have no experience with, who's gonna be that person when it jams up?
Yeah, I believe there's going to be vendor and state support.
So
Because there's only a couple
But when you
towns
say,
that are-
when you say support, is someone
Somebody
physically there?
that is my understanding,
Okay, so I think,
is that there will be someone
you need to
on site
confirm
for
that.
support.
I think it's
am not 100% sure.
I'm just suggesting that it's important to understand what that means, because the burden on someone on our staff who's never used the machine, all of a sudden they have to be on the phone talking to someone to fix it, and the line keeps getting longer and longer and longer.
Yeah, that would be bad. I mean, my sense also is, I mean, the state, and like I've, I've had a number of conversations with Secretary of State myself also, and I know our clerk, they are very interested in trying these machines, and I would be very surprised if they did not set us up for success with this. I don't have the 100% answer from our Bobby believes that there will be someone on site from the state to provide support.
I think what we're saying is you might have some idea what the fallback plan. If
When
it
something-
We'll ask them about
If
that.
it doesn't work.
I mean, my request is, we were real clear
Right.
on when the machine jams, what's the solution, and is someone on site, is it on a phone, or what? And then our staff are prepared to jump in, because what happens, people get busy, they're down at that far end, they went to lunch, whatever, all practical things, and then it gets jammed. And there's always, in the current process, there's always a backup person with the magic key when the main person goes out for 15 minutes or something. I mean,
I'm gonna pass along this as a concern from the board.
And we, and
Yeah.
all four of us have been in that position.
Right.
And, raise your hand, and here comes the key person, we've been the key person. So, and the voters are standing there, and the voters expect
They expect
the
us to-
problem resolved,
Right.
not through a call to Concord.
Right.
And they say, it's lever D,
Yeah.
often not.
But if there is approval, then I will communicate it with the select
Just
board's concern and interest that there be on-site support. If
How about
possible.
if there's not on-site support or clear support, then we can't support?
Correct.
Okay, I can communicate that.
Yeah.
It's
Sure.
contingent on that.
Contingent on on-site support.
yeah, on clear support,
Human
that's,
being,
Yes.
yes,
I guess these days I should specify that.
I think so. Thank you, sir.
So one of those robots from Stop and Shop?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, little bot people.
Can I hear a motion for adjournment?
I'll move that.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, we're adjourned.
Thank you again.
very much.
Again, thank you, Alan and Alex, for a great job getting us to this point.
Thank you for
Wow.
all your support.